The first thing I heard was the lighter. A neat metallic click in the dark. Soft, precise, almost polite. I stopped with my hand on the iron gate and the cold stone biting the soles of my feet. The courtyard was black except for the strip of moonlight lying across the fountain. Beyond the wall, the sea was a restless animal. I could smell wet rosemary, old limestone, and the salt that drifted up from the cliffs below the Salvetter estate. For half a second, I let myself hope the sound had come from somewhere else. Then the flame opened. It lit a man's hand first. Long fingers, a silver ring, the brief orange cut of fire against olive skin, and a black suit that looked too expensive for the hour before dawn. He stood near the fountain as if he had been there all night, one shoulder turned toward me, his face mostly shadow except for the hard line of his mouth. He did not look surprised to see me. That was the part that made my stomach drop. He had expected this. "You should have taken shoes," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, and terribly awake. I had met Dante Salvetter less than 8 hours ago. When 2 of his men brought me from my father's bakery after midnight with blood still drying between the tiles and sugar still crusted on the counters. He had asked 3 questions: my name, whether my father kept a second ledger, whether I trusted my brother. I had answered 2. He had watched me lie about the third with eyes so still I'd understood immediately why men lowered their own. Now he flicked the lighter shut. Click. Darkness folded around us again. "Open the gate," I whispered to myself more than to him. My hand tightened on the key I'd stolen from the downstairs cupboard. "I'm leaving." "No." I turned then, because there is only so much fear a body can carry before it starts to feel like anger. "You don't get to keep me here." A faint breeze moved his jacket. Nothing else about him shifted. And yet, I hated the steadiness of him, hated that the courtyard, the walls, the black windows above us all seemed arranged around the fact of his patience. "I'm not part of your world. You were standing in the middle of it when I found you. I was standing in my father's bakery." "Exactly." He took 1 step forward. That was all. Still, every nerve in me lit up. Not desire, not yet. Just awareness so sharp it felt like a blade being drawn. I pressed back against the gate. "What do you want from me?" "The truth. I don't have it." Another click. He had opened the lighter again without my seeing his thumb move. "That's not the same thing." I should have said something sharp, something brave. Instead, I said the most honest thing in me. "I want to go home." His eyes found mine in the dark. "There is no home to go back to tonight." The words landed before I could protect myself from them. That was when the gunshot cracked over the courtyard wall. One of the guards on the upper walk shouted. A second shot followed, then the thud of a body hitting stone. I flinched hard enough to drop the key. Dante moved before the sound finished echoing. He crossed the courtyard in 3 strides, shoved me behind the fountain with one hand at my shoulder, and drew his gun with the other. The contact lasted less than a second. Heat through thin cotton. Command without force. He had already turned away when I felt it. More shouting, footsteps overhead. Someone groaned near the archway leading to the inner hall. "Stay down," Dante said. He went toward the gunfire. Of course he did. I should have stayed where he put me, I knew that. But another sound cut through the chaos, not a shout, not a command. A wet, choking breath. Human in clothes, a man had fallen beside the arch. He was young, maybe 30, in a black suit gone darker at the stomach. Blood ran between his fingers. Not dead, not yet. My father had taught me to knead dough before I was tall enough to reach the counter, but my mother had been a nurse before she married him. And after she died, I learned everything she'd left in books because helplessness made me sick. The man looked at me, panicked. "Madonna, press harder," I snapped, already dropping to my knees. I tore the hem of my nightgown clean up the side. The fabric gave with a harsh rip. I shoved his hands aside and packed the wound. Blood heated my palms instantly. He cried out. "Good," I said. "That means you're alive. Hold here, hard, don't argue with me." Boots pounded over stone. Men swore in Sicilian. The iron taste of gun smoke mixed with rosemary and sea salt. Someone shouted Dante's name. I didn't look up. "Keep pressure." "If you pass out, I'll be furious." "I'm already furious," the injured man gasped. Well, that's excellent. Stay offended. A shadow fell over us. I glanced up then. Dante stood there with his gun lowered at his side, his expression unreadable except for one thing, not shock exactly. More like a stillness that had sharpened into something dangerous. One of his men behind him was bleeding from the ear. Another already had his phone out, barking for the doctor. But Dante was looking at me as if the courtyard had narrowed to one impossible point. Not because I was scared, because I wasn't looking at him, I was looking at the wound. "Get Luciano inside," he said without taking his eyes off me. Two men moved at once. The wounded guard, Luciano, clutched my wrist before they lifted him. "She told me what to do," he muttered. "I heard her," Dante said. I rose slowly, blood on my hands and nightgown, hair loose down my back, breathing too hard. I suddenly became aware of how close he was. Of the smell of cold air on his coat, something dark beneath it, and a trace of smoke from the lighter. His gaze dropped to the torn fabric at my thigh, then returned to my face. "You disobeyed me quickly," he said. "You had a man bleeding on the floor." His jaw tightened once. "Most people here look at me first. I know. Apparently that made no difference. No," the corner of his mouth almost moved, not a smile, something smaller and stranger. He took off his suit jacket and held it out. I stared at it for a second before understanding. My torn nightgown, my bare legs, the men nearby pretending not to see. When I reached for the jacket, his fingers brushed the inside of my wrist. There were my hands, slick with someone else's blood. There was his skin, dry and warm. That was the first almost. Nothing more than a touch that should have ended faster than it did. "Sparrow," he said quietly, looking at the ripped cloth at my side, the gate behind me, the wild pulse in my throat. "If you try the wall next time, at least wait for daylight." I stared at him. "Don't call me that." His men heard it. I knew because the air changed, not laughter. Nobody around Dante laughed carelessly, but something registered. He had named me. He turned toward the house. "Bring her inside." I planted my feet. "No," he looked back over his shoulder. There was no anger in his face. That was worse. "You can walk, or one of them can carry you. Either way, the gate stays closed. I'm not your prisoner." He came back to me then, until only the length of his own jacket hung between us. His voice dropped enough that the others could not hear it. "No," he said. "You're the one thing everyone who shot at this house tonight was willing to kill for. Learn the difference." Then he bent, picked up the key I had dropped, and slipped it into his pocket. The gate remained locked. So did the world I had known before it. I did not sleep again. Teresa Bellomo found me at 6 in the morning, sitting on the edge of the bed, in a borrowed robe, with my hands scrubbed raw, and my thoughts even worse. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with silver threaded through black hair, and the practical expression of someone who had raised brothers, sons, or possibly wolves. She carried a tray with coffee, toast, and a boiled egg, then looked at me once and replaced the cup with sugared tea. "Coffee on an empty stomach after gunfire is just panic with better branding," she said. I took the tea because I did not know what else to do. Her room smelled faintly of starch and orange peel. Beyond the tall windows, the sea had gone blue and merciless. "I need a phone," I said. "You need breakfast. My brother will still be your brother after 2 bites." I stared at her until she slid a small plate toward me with the patience of a saint and the authority of a prison. "Wardens." The bread was warm, olive oil shone on the crust. My stomach betrayed me with a cramp. "Eat," she said, softer now, "then be furious." So I did. The villa changed in daylight. At night, it had felt like a fortress someone had disguised as a home. In the morning, I saw the marble floors, the old religious paintings, the carved walnut doors heavy enough to keep weather or people out. Every corridor held a silence that was not peace but discipline. Men stood at corners pretending not to guard anything. Italian murmured from distant rooms, then cut off whenever footsteps approached. Teresa walked me down to breakfast herself. "He likes punctuality," she said. "Then he should marry a clock," she snorted. "That would be less trouble for all of us." The breakfast room opened onto the eastern terrace, where sunlight struck the sea so hard it hurt. Dante sat at the long end of a table that could have hosted 20, but held only one black coffee, one newspaper, and one silver lighter beside his hand. Click, shut, click, shut. A rhythm as controlled as his breathing. He was not in a jacket now, white shirt, dark vest. The sleeves rolled once at the forearm. I hated noticing his hands. I hated noticing anything at all. Tommaso Rizzi stood by the terrace doors with a fresh bandage around his side. Not the man I had saved, but the head of security, Teresa had told me. Former carabinieri, and permanently suspicious of oxygen. His eyes tracked me with professional distrust. And then there was the giant at the sideboard, staring mournfully at a basket of cornetti, as if they had personally insulted his mother. That, Teresa murmured, following my glance, is Bruno Marchetti. If you value your peace, never ask him about carbohydrates. Too late. Bruno turned, saw the pastries, and sighed like a condemned man. He was huge, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a suit that looked expensive enough to buy a small orchard. A scar cut through one eyebrow. He carried a plate piled only with prosciutto. This is psychological warfare, he announced to no one and everyone. Putting butter in my line of sight before 8 in the morning is attempted murder. Teresa folded her arms. One cornetto won't kill you. That is how weakness begins. Tommaso muttered, no. Weakness begins when you recite nutrition facts during an arms shipment. Bruno shot him a wounded look. My cholesterol is a living thing, Tommaso. Show respect. Against my will, a laugh almost escaped me. I bit it back. Dante looked up at the sound I had nearly made, and the room went still. Sit, Sparrow. There it was again. Cold. Possessive only because he made every word sound like ownership if he chose. I sat because standing there felt more exposed. A maid poured coffee. Dante stopped her with one finger before she reached my cup. Tea. I looked at him sharply. I can choose my own drink. You had coffee last night and your hands shook. How closely do you monitor beverages? As closely as I monitor exits. Teresa made a quiet sound in the back of her throat that might have been approval. Bruno sat at the far side of the table with his prosciutto, and the expression of a man attending a funeral for bread. I wrapped both hands around the teacup mostly to keep from doing something foolish. You said people were willing to kill for me. Why? Dante folded the newspaper in half. Because your father did not only bake bread. I went cold. Don't. He moved money. No, he washed cash through flour orders, shell accounts, and delivery routes. Very competently for a baker. You're lying. Your father was many things, Dante said. A liar was one of them. The words landed harder because he said them gently. I pushed back from the table. My father was in debt. That's not the same as, he kept records. I froze. There must have been something in my face. Dante saw it. Tommaso saw it too. Teresa looked down at her hands. I don't know what you mean, I said, and even to my own ears it sounded thin. No, Dante asked. Stop talking like you already know the answer. His gaze held mine. Then tell me I'm wrong. I opened my mouth and discovered the terrible weakness of truth. It does not organize itself for you when you are frightened. My father had kept notebooks, yes, recipe books. Supply ledgers, lists of names with numbers that made no sense to me. I had seen one hidden beneath sacks of semolina 3 weeks before he died, but I had closed the drawer and told myself fathers were allowed mysteries. Tommaso shifted. The leather of his shoulder holster creaked. Dante did not press. That was somehow worse than pressure. He let the silence fill itself. I thought of the bakery, of blood on white tiles, of my brother Matteo shouting that we had to run before the police, or the mob decided what was left of us belonged to them. Bruno chose that moment to lift a single cornetto with 2 fingers and stare at it with tragic dignity. If I die, he said solemnly, tell my mother Teresa forced it on me. Teresa slapped the back of his head with a napkin. Eat it and die happy. He took a bite, closed his eyes, and actually whispered, Madonna forgive me. This time I laughed before I could stop myself. It burst out small and shocked and totally wrong for the room. Dante's eyes shifted to my mouth, just for a second, then away. That was the second almost, not touch this time. recognition. A pause that should not have mattered. He stood. Chairs did not scrape when he moved. Men moved before furniture could. You will remain on the estate. I said I'm not staying. You are until I know where the ledger is. I don't have a ledger. Then this should be easy. He came around the table. My body knew he was near before he reached me. Heat, air displacement, the clean scent of starch and something colder, like he had been outside before dawn again and brought it back in with him. He stopped beside my chair, not touching me. There are 3 rules, he said. You do not leave the villa without escort. You do not use the phone unless Tommaso stands next to you. You do not lie to me a second time. I lifted my chin. And if I break them? His answer was so quiet I felt it more than heard it. You'll learn how much restraint I'm spending on you. Then he walked away. The room stayed his long after he was gone. The safest room in the villa turned out to be the kitchen. Not because it had no guards. It had 2, usually seated near the service door pretending to discuss football while watching every corridor reflection in polished copper. Not because it was free of danger. Nothing in that house was free of Dante, but kitchens belonged to hands, and I understood hands better than power. Teresa let me help after lunch mostly because I stood in her doorway until she surrendered out of self-defense. If you cry into the onions, I'll charge you rent, she warned. I'm not crying. Good. Salt's expensive. The kitchen was wide and bright, with a marble worktable scarred by decades of knives and heat rings. The ovens breathed steady warmth. Bowls of lemons sat under the window. Flour lived in linen sacks stacked like soldiers against one wall. I tied on an apron and felt, for the first time since midnight, something in me settle. My father used to say dough told the truth faster than people did. Press too hard, it toughened. Leave it neglected, it died. Give it warmth and time, and it became more than the sum of its raw ingredients. I had believed him because I had needed him to be the kind of man who could teach goodness through bread and not hide ruin in the books beneath the counter. Teresa watched me make lemon cream with a silence that felt respectful, not suspicious. You worked the dawn shift, every day since I was 16. That's why you tried to flee before sunrise, she said. Your body thinks morning means freedom. I looked up sharply, but her face was bent over artichokes. No judgment, just accuracy. I thought morning meant I could get a head start. In this house, she slid a pan toward me. Child, in this house he invented head starts. I should have hated how often everyone's sentences bent toward Dante. Instead, I found myself listening for them, collecting fragments. The boss never repeated himself. The boss never ate before everyone else had been checked. The boss had once fired a man for slamming a door during a meeting. The boss had not slept more than 4 hours in one stretch since he was 19. That last one came from Bruno, who appeared at the kitchen door looking haunted. Teresa didn't turn. No, I haven't spoken yet. You're here before dinner, so no. Bruno entered anyway, one hand pressed dramatically to his abdomen. I'm starving. This new regimen is a war crime. You said that yesterday. Yesterday it was a complaint, today it is medical fact. I was zesting lemons. The peel released bright oil under my fingers. You ate 3 slices of roast pork at lunch. He pointed at me in betrayal. Exactly, 3 slices. Do you see how she counts? This is the kind of surveillance state I'm living in. Teresa sniffed. Maybe if you married a sensible woman, she'd feed you vegetables. Bruno actually straightened his tie. Teresa Bellomo, if you are about to volunteer, I must ask for a minute alone with my thoughts. She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it without losing dignity, which was impressive considering his dignity had been assembled from scraps to begin with. I looked down at the bowl to hide my smile. That was when Dante entered. It happened first in the silence. A room full of people working, speaking, chopping, boiling, then nothing. Not fear exactly, more like recognition reorganizing itself around him. I did not turn immediately. I told myself I was busy. I told myself I had no reason to care. Then I felt him stop on the other side of the marble table, and every tiny hair at my wrist lifted. Teresa, he said, Salvo arrives in 20 minutes. Uncle Salvo, then. I had heard the name 3 times already, always with the careful neutrality people use when discussing whether that can flood a town. And, Teresa said. And Bruno will eat vegetables if you put them on his plate. Bruno put a hand to his chest. Boss, why do you wound the loyal? Dante's gaze moved to the bowl under my hands. What is that? Lemon cream, I said before Teresa could. For a tart. With what crust? Almond. He said nothing. I kept whisking. This is the part, Bruno announced, where normal people say it smells good. Dante ignored him. You use bitter almond. Only a little. Why? I finally looked at him. Up close in daylight he was worse. Not prettier. That would have been easier to dismiss. He was severe in a way that made everything else in a room seem overdesigned. Dark hair, still face. Eyes that gave away nothing except attention, and only when they chose. Because if the lemon is all sweetness, I said, it tastes childish. Bitterness makes the sweetness honest. Something unreadable crossed his face. Teresa looked suddenly interested in the stove. I'm making the shell with burnt sugar, I added because silence with him made me nervous enough to overtalk. So it cracks when you cut it. Why would you build a dessert to break? The answer came before I could tidy it. Because some things are stronger after heat. The kitchen went so quiet I heard the oven hum. Bruno muttered, Madonna preserve us, she's making philosophy now. Dante reached past the bowl then, not touching me, just taking the paring knife from beside my hand. His sleeve brushed my wrist anyway. Heat again. Deliberate only in that nothing about him was accidental. He set the knife farther away from my fingers as if he had seen I was holding it too tightly. That was the third almost. Salvo Vescari arrived 5 minutes later with silver hair, an elegant cane he did not need, and the kind of smile that made every instinct in me gather itself. He kissed Teresa's cheek, complained about traffic from Palermo, and greeted me with immaculate courtesy. So this is the baker's daughter, he said. Elena Morty, I answered. His eyes lingered a fraction too long. Your father made excellent panettone. My father is dead, he inclined his head. A waste. Dante's stillness changed. Tiny, dangerous, Salvo noticed. Smiled a little more. May I borrow my nephew? Dante said to Tommaso. Stay with her. I wanted to object to the order on principle, but Tommaso was already beside the pantry door with his permanent scowl. After the men left, I finished the tart mostly by touch. Butter, citrus, sugar blistering under flame. Teresa watched me plate it and said, very quietly, Your father ever asked you to memorize recipes that didn't make culinary sense? The blow was so sudden I nearly dropped the spoon. I looked at her. She did not look back. Fast mystery, immediate threat, truth pressing from every side. That evening, when I was sent to my room, I discovered my old recipe notebook laid carefully on the desk. I had not seen anyone bring it there. Inside the front cover, tucked where no recipe should have been, was a charred holy card of St. Agatha. On the back, in my father's hand, was one line. If Dante asks, tell him I tried to get the girl out. I didn't know which girl. But somewhere below my room, men were already moving against us. Dante, he had known the holy card, the second Tommaso, placed the notebook in his hand. Sophia used to keep one in the glove box because she thought saints liked the sea. Elena did not know that her father had been on the docks, the night Dante's sister burned. She did not know that the recipe codes in her father's books mapped the same off-ledger shipments Salvo had buried for years. And she did not know Dante had just stopped himself from taking the lemon from her thumb with his mouth, because restraint had become the only religion he trusted. The chapel stood behind the villa under a cypress grove, separate from the main house, the way guilt is always separate from appetite, no matter how often they share a table. I found it by accident the next afternoon, while Tommaso escorted me around the east grounds like a suspicious tour guide. The air smelled of resin and hot stone. Cicadas had begun their relentless summer machinery. Beyond the vineyard, the sea flashed between the trees. You don't have to follow me this closely, I said. Yes, I do. You're impossible. I've heard that from more attractive women than you. I glanced at his bandage. I saved someone's life 2 nights ago. You could at least pretend gratitude. Tommaso's mouth twitched. That was practically a sonnet. Gratitude and security are different departments. The chapel door was open. Inside, it was dim and cool and smelled of wax, old wood, and the mineral damp of stone that never fully dries. 100 red glass votives flickered before a painted Madonna whose face had been rubbed pale by years of prayer. I had not stepped into a church since my father's funeral. My feet slowed anyway. Tommaso stayed outside. I was halfway up the aisle when I heard the lighter. Click, not inside. Behind me at the threshold, I didn't turn at once. Something about the place made every movement feel like it should matter. I stood there staring at the candles until Dante's voice came from the doorway. You were gone too long. Is there a schedule for grief now? He closed the distance without answering. When he stopped beside the first pew, he looked larger in the chapel than outside it, as though violence brought its own gravity into sacred spaces. His gaze traveled once over the room, then to my face, then away to the votive rack where several candles had gone out. I didn't know you prayed, I said. I don't. Then why come here? He took out the lighter and relit the first candle with a practiced hand. Habit. The tiny flame shook, then steadied. I watched his face in the candlelight. Not softened, just stripped of a layer. Did you know the girl in the note? I asked. His hand paused. What note? The holy card in my father's recipe book. He turned then, slowly. You read it. It had my father's handwriting on it. What else was in the notebook? Recipes. Elena. I hated the way my name sounded coming from him. Too heavy, too direct. Numbers, I admitted. Delivery dates. Flour orders that never matched the invoices. I thought he was hiding debt from me. He was hiding blood. I flinched, not because he raised his voice, he never had to, but because the word fit too well. He relit another candle. Your father moved shipments for my family through his bakery account. He began under coercion. He stayed because leaving costs more than joining. I looked at the Madonna because looking at him hurt too much. You say that as if it excuses him. No. I say it because truth does not improve when dressed properly. A pulse beat in my throat. And the girl, he said nothing. I turned to face him fully. Who was she? The silence stretched. Then he took one step closer, close enough that I could see the fine scar near his jaw I had missed before. My sister. The chapel changed around the words. I looked at him, really looked. There it was, not softness, never that, but a fault line, controlled so hard it had become structure. What happened? His expression closed. She died because I was late. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. Outside, a shout split the grove. Tommaso barked something sharp. Another voice answered from too close, to the side entrance. Dante moved instantly, catching my wrist and pulling me behind the stone pillar at the chapel mouth, just as glass shattered inward from the small window beside the altar. A bullet smacked into wood. Splinters flew. I gasped. His arm came across my throat, not crushing, just pinning me back to his chest as he angled his body between me and the nave. His other hand held the gun already drawn. Stay still, he murmured into my hair. It should have felt like terror. Maybe it did, but layered under it was something worse because it made no sense, safety so intense it disturbed me. His palm was flat just below my collarbone, the pressure exact. My back fit the length of his front in a way my body noticed against my permission. That was the fourth almost, not a kiss. Not even tenderness, just proximity weaponized until it turned intimate by accident. Men thundered outside. Dante fired once past the pillar. The sound inside the chapel cracked through my ribs. Then silence again except for hard breathing mine. Gone, Tommaso called from the yard. Motorbike. Dante did not release me immediately. When he did, his hand slid from my throat to my shoulder, then away. I turned too fast and the world tilted. Dante caught my chin before I could look away. Hold still. There was a sliver of stained glass just below my jaw, bright with blood. Not much, a line more than a wound. Still, something in his face changed when he saw it, not panic. He was too disciplined for panic, but a coldness came over him so absolute it felt like weather. I'm fine, I said. That word has become meaningless in this chapel. He pulled a folded handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to my neck himself. The linen was clean, smelling faintly of starch and the smoke from his lighter. His fingers bracketed my throat with impossible care. My pulse jumped against his knuckles. I hated that he could feel it. Outside, boots pounded over gravel again. Tommaso appeared in the doorway first, jaw set, gun still raised. Bruno came behind him, carrying a shotgun and breathing like a man who had run uphill against his own theology. I would like the record to show, Bruno said, stopping dead when he saw us, that I crossed the peacock lawn at speed for this family. One of those demons chased me. If I lose a calf muscle, Teresa owes me soup. It was such a ridiculous sentence in a chapel that I stared at him. Tommaso lowered his weapon. Shooter-s gone. The bike was waiting beyond the grove. Too clean. Of course it was, Bruno muttered. No one ever survives assassination attempts untidily around here. Dante did not take his eyes off me. Who knew she was in the chapel? Tommaso answered first. Me. Teresa saw us head east, 2 guards at the lower walk. And Salvo knew you were on the grounds. The silence after that was sharp enough to cut with. Dante removed the glass from my neck in one precise motion. I inhaled hard. His thumb flattened the handkerchief against the bead of blood that followed. You should sit, he said. I don't want to. I know. It was not a command. Somehow that made it more intimate. Bruno looked between us, then wisely looked at the ceiling. I'm going to stand over there, he announced. Far over there, where emotional crises are less aerodynamic. No one stopped him. I held the linen in place myself when Dante finally stepped back. The loss of his hand felt absurdly immediate. Tell me the truth, I said. All of it. He studied me for one long second, then nodded once. Your father tried to leave Salvo's operation 6 weeks ago, he said. He reached out through an old doc contact and asked for a meeting with me, not Salvo. He said he had records, roots, names, enough to burn half the coast. I could hear my own breathing. He died before that meeting happened, Dante went on. Until this morning, I believed he was killed for disloyalty. Now I think he was killed because he also tried to get you out. I looked down at the blood on the handkerchief, then up at him. Why me? Because leverage matters, his voice roughened by a degree. And because men like Salvo understand daughters. The chapel seemed suddenly too small for the air in it. My father knew, I whispered. He knew how dangerous it was, and he still... Yes, I laughed once. It broke in the middle and did not become anything human. He used my recipes. Your memory, Dante corrected. Not your consent. That should have comforted me. It didn't. Tommaso checked his phone, then looked at Dante. Luciano's awake, asking for the girl who yelled at him. Bruno folded his massive arms. Frankly, I'd ask for her too. She's frightening in a crisis. A pulse of something strange moved through the men around us, a fraction of warmth inside the threat. Dante noticed it. His gaze came back to me. In the courtyard, he said quietly, you went to the wound before you looked at me. I swallowed. He was bleeding. Exactly. I didn't know why that answer changed the room. He took back the blood-stained handkerchief, folded it once, and slipped it into his inside pocket as if it were evidence. Then he stepped aside from the doorway. Come inside, Sparrow. His voice was still controlled, still dangerous, but the word had shifted by a hair I could not explain. I walked out of the chapel with gun smoke in my lungs, his jacket still around my shoulders, and one new truth lodged under my ribs like glass. My father had not died by chance. By evening, the villa knew something had changed even if no one said it aloud. Men checked windows twice. Phones rang and were answered in lower voices. The courtyard where I had tried to escape before dawn now held 2 extra guards and a shepherd dog with yellow eyes. In the kitchen, Teresa chopped fennel as if she intended to punish the board for existing. Bruno prowled in and out, claiming heightened vigilance while stealing slices of pecorino and swearing each one was medicinal. I sat at the long prep table with my father's recipe notebook open under the lamps. The pages looked innocent. Flour, eggs, yeast, orange peel. Sugar temperatures, written in the hurried slant. I had learned to read before I learned algebra. But now I could see where quantities repeated too neatly, where dates had no culinary logic, where whole pages of panettone ratios fell around shipping days my father had always claimed were supplier delays. Tommaso stood by the service door with his arms crossed, pretending not to watch me think. He made me memorize them, I said without looking up. Tommaso's brows pulled together. The recipes, all of them. If I forgot one number, he made me start over. My throat tightened. I thought he was proud of me. Teresa did not stop chopping. He may have been. That hurt more than if she had defended him. A supervised call came through at 7. Tommaso placed the phone on speaker at the table. Matteo answered on the second ring, breathless and angry and achingly familiar. Elena. Dio, where are you? At the Salvator estate. There was a silence dense enough to feel. What are you doing there? Trying to survive your terrible planning, I snapped, because if I didn't start sharp, I was going to cry. You left me with no warning, Matteo. I was trying to get cash. I came back and there was blood everywhere. Did you know what Papa was doing? He said nothing. The knife in Teresa's hand stopped. Matteo. His exhale shook through the speaker. I knew he was carrying money for someone. Not everything, not the codes. He said the less I knew, the longer I'd live. Did he use me? He used what you could do, my brother said. Your memory. You never forgot measurements. He told me once paper burns faster than a daughter's head. I closed my eyes. There it was, forced open, not confessed. My secret and my father's both. Dante entered the kitchen halfway through the call and said nothing. He stood at the far end of the table with his hands loose at his sides, while Matteo kept talking too fast. He was scared at the end, my brother said. Papa, he said if anything happened, you were not to trust anyone named Vescari. Every person in the room went still. Dante did not move. Ask him why. I looked at the phone. Why? Because Salvo wanted the dock routes to stay dirty. Papa said Salvo was hiding shipments from Dante's father before he died. Bigger shipments. Worse men behind them. Tommaso swore under his breath. Where are you? I asked. Moving, Matteo said, and Elena listened to me. If Salvator offers protection, take it until you can run. The line cut, just like that. No goodbye, no certainty, only static. I stared at the notebook until the numbers blurred. Dante came forward at last and turned the book toward himself. He did not touch my hands. That restraint had become its own violence. What did he make you memorize first? He asked. The sweet doughs, I said automatically. Then preserves, then the Christmas breads. Which page never made sense? I flipped without thinking. Page 32. Orange cake with impossible flour ratios. Page 33. Almond biscuits dated 3 days apart with different storage notes but identical weights. Dante looked at the numbers once. Coordinates, I blinked. What? Bruno leaned over my shoulder, smelled the page as if cinnamon could solve crime, and said, If this becomes a mathematics situation, I'm resigning. Teresa smacked his arm. Quiet. Dante took a pencil and underlined the ingredient quantities in pairs. 12.4, 38.1, 13.9, the dock grid, the coastal road markers. I saw it then not because he explained, but because once a pattern breaks open it is impossible to unsee. Oh my God! Again, he said. We worked for an hour side by side at the marble table. Route by route, shipment by shipment, flour weight becoming containers, baking times becoming dates. My father had hidden an empire inside desserts and expected me to carry it in my head. At some point, Teresa set down a plate between us. My lemon tart. The sugar shell had gone glassy under the lights, burnt gold over pale cream. I must have made a noise because Bruno spoke with theatrical reverence. Ah, he said, the dessert of emotional instability. I stared at him. Excuse me, he held up both hands. Your exact words, more or less, bitter underneath, sweet only if it earns it, cracks when pressed. If that is not a self-portrait, I have wasted years around women. To my horror, Teresa nodded. Dante's gaze moved from the tart to my face. He picked up a fork, broke through the caramel top, and the shell shattered with a clean, delicate sound. That was another almost, not physical, worse. The sound of something built to resist finally giving way. He tasted it and looked at me for a long second. Honest, he said. I had to look away. Later, on the west terrace with the sea gone black below us, I admitted the thing I had spent years refusing even to think. I knew something was wrong, I told him. Not what, but wrong. And I kept choosing not to ask because if I asked, then I would have had to know him differently. The wind moved my hair across my mouth. Dante caught the strand and tucked it behind my ear before he seemed to remember himself. His hand dropped immediately. That was restraint again. Deliberate, costly. You were his daughter, he said. I was old enough to stop being one when it mattered. No, his voice was quiet. You were old enough to be betrayed by it. I swallowed hard enough to hurt. Tommaso stepped onto the terrace then, face set. The chapel root leaked. Only family and inner house knew. Dante's expression changed by a degree. Lethal, controlled. Salvo, I asked. Suspected, Tommaso said. Not proven. Dante's gaze stayed on the dark sea. Not yet. Someone inside his world wanted us dead. And for the first time, I understood that meant someone inside the house. War did not announce itself with trumpets. It arrived with a flat tire on a clean road, and 3 men already waiting in the grove. Dante had decided before dawn that we were moving the notebook and me to a safe villa inland, until the coded routes were copied and cross-checked. He gave the order at breakfast with the same tone another man might use to request more coffee. Tommaso drove. Bruno sat in front and grumbled that rural ambushes were always badly timed and incompatible with digestion. I sat in the back beside Dante with my father's notebook in a leather case on my lap, and the whole sky opening pale over the olive trees. The car smelled of gun oil, expensive leather, and Dante's cologne with the cold morning still clinging to it. His silver lighter clicked once in his hand, then went still. You can stop doing that, I said. Doing what? Making the same sound every time you're thinking murder. Bruno looked back between the seats. For the record, that sound also means spreadsheets. Tommaso kept his eyes on the road. And funerals. See, I said. Unsettling. Dante's mouth changed by almost nothing. You notice too much. The rear tire exploded. Tommaso fought the wheel. The car jerked sideways on gravel. Bruno swore with profound creativity. Dante's arm shot across me before the first bullet hit the rear window. Glass burst inward. Down, Dante said. His body covered mine as Tommaso skidded the car into the ditch line. More shots. Controlled, not wild. Professionals. The world narrowed to noise, flying safety glass, the weight of Dante over me, and the leather case digging into my ribs. Bruno was already out of the front passenger door returning fire. Tommaso moved on the driver's side. Dante shoved me low between the seats and stepped out with terrifying economy, not a wasted motion anywhere in him. I should have stayed down. Instead, I looked. The grove was silver-green with dawn. Olive trunks twisted up from red earth. 3 men in dark jackets using the trees for cover. Dante crossed the road like he had all the time in the world, which was more frightening than rage could ever be. He fired once. 1 man dropped. Tommaso took the second in the shoulder, then the throat. The third came around the rear of the car and aimed straight for my door. I didn't think. I kicked it open hard enough to catch his knee. He stumbled, the notebook case slid. Dante turned at the sound, reached me first, and shot the man from less than 2 feet away. Blood hit the dust. I stared. There is a point where violence stops being abstract forever. That was mine. The man looked surprised for a whole second before he looked dead. Dante caught my face between both hands and turned it away before I could keep staring. Look at me. I did. Can you move? Yes. Good. A hiss of breath escaped him then. I looked down and saw the blood soaking through his shirt under the jacket. You're hit. It's shallow. Dante, get in the grove. He pushed me toward the tree line, one hand at my back. Then covered us both, while Bruno retrieved the other car, hidden farther down the road. Tommaso's sleeve was torn. Blood ran from Bruno's temple. None of them seemed surprised by pain. That, somehow, terrified me more. The safe villa was smaller, all shuttered windows and a stone cellar beneath the pantry. By the time the heavy door locked behind us, my hands were shaking too hard to hide it. Dante took off his jacket. The bullet had creased his side under the ribs, enough to cut and bleed, not enough to kill. He reached for clean gauze on the shelf. I took it from him. He let me. The cellar smelled of old cork, limestone, and dust. A bare bulb swung overhead. Somewhere above us, Bruno was shouting for bandages, and absurdly, for low-sodium crackers because near-death events trigger cravings. "Take off the shirt," I said. Dante looked at me once, then obeyed. His skin was warm and marked in ways I had not been meant to see. Old scars, a healed burn near the shoulder blade, a thin white line along the ribs that looked surgical. History written in restraint. I cleaned the wound carefully. He did not flinch. "I killed a man in front of you," he said. "Yes, you should be afraid." "I am." His eyes held mine. "Of me?" I set the gauze down harder than necessary. "That's the problem. I don't know." Silence, heavy and electric. I taped the dressing in place with fingers that were trying not to betray me. When I finished, he caught my wrist, not trapping, just stopping. His thumb rested over my pulse. "I know why," he said softly, almost to himself. "Why what?" But he was already looking past me, somewhere inward, somewhere dangerous. Dante, she had gone to the wound, in the courtyard, on the road, always the same terrible instinct. No bargaining with power, no performance of fear, no careful orbit around what he was. She saw blood and moved toward it, even when it belonged to men who would die for him before they ever deserved her mercy. No one in his world had done that since Sophia. That was the beginning. Not her face, not her innocence, the refusal to treat power as the first emergency. He released my wrist. "Why I can't let this end with you dead," he said. The air changed around the words. I should have stepped back, I knew that. Instead I stayed where I was, close enough to smell the iron of his blood under soap and cold stone. Another almost. "My father is dead because of your family," I whispered. "Yes, your uncle may have ordered it. Yes, you kill men without blinking. Yes," I laughed once, broken and breathless. "This would be simpler if you'd just be monstrous all the way through." A shadow moved in his face. "I know." I looked at his mouth and hated myself for noticing. "I don't understand what's happening to me." His composure cracked by one fraction, then sealed again. "Sparrow, I know," my voice shook. "I know I should want distance, I know. I don't want you to leave me alone in it." For the first time since I had met him, Dante looked stripped bare by something other than violence. He touched my cheek as if the permission might vanish if he moved too fast. Then he kissed me. Not hard, not hungry first, careful in a way that undid me faster than force ever could have. His hand stayed at my face. Mine found his shoulder, then froze there, uncertain. He drew back almost immediately, forehead resting against mine, breathing rough. That was restraint again. The fiercest kind. When he kissed me a second time, slower, I turned into it before I understood I had chosen anything at all. A knock sounded overhead. We both went still. Bruno's voice came faintly through the floorboards. "If anyone dies while I'm finding crackers, I'll be livid." I made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been panic. Dante's thumb brushed the corner of my mouth once. War had found us anyway. By the time Tommaso came down with the coppice root sheets, and the news that 2 more Salvator properties had been hit before noon, I had Dante's blood on my hands again, and his mouth still warm in my memory. War had arrived. After the ambush, everything accelerated. Men came and went from the inland villa at all hours carrying weapons, maps, burner phones, and the brittle quiet of people who understood they were already inside the first hour of a war. Tommaso set up a command table in the dining room. Bruno handled cars, food, routes, and complaints with equal theatrical seriousness. Teresa arrived by dusk with soup, 3 black dresses, and enough cigarettes for the guards to pray over her. I spent most of the next day copying recipe codes from memory, while Dante moved through rooms like a blade no one had dared put away. He did not touch me, not once. That hurt more than it should have after a single kiss in a wine cellar. He spoke to me only when necessary. Eat, rest, start with the Easter bread pages, yet every order bent itself around my safety. It should have made me feel protected. Instead, it made me feel the shape of what he was refusing. By the third night, Salvo stopped pretending subtlety. The harbor warehouse in Trapani went up in flames just after midnight. One of Dante's shipping foremen disappeared. At 4 a.m, a black sedan rammed the inland villa gate, and gunfire answered from both sides before I was fully awake. Bruno dragged me to the pantry floor with Teresa swearing behind us, and Tommaso firing through the front hall windows with a calmness that made the entire scene more terrifying. Luciano arrived bleeding again. This time there was too much of it. They dragged him through the kitchen service door while dawn leaked gray over the counters. I was already on my knees with towels before anyone asked. His shirt was ruined. Blood pumped dark between my fingers when I pressed down. "No," I said. No. "Hold still." Luciano tried to smile at me. It came out crooked. He was the same guard from the courtyard, younger than the hard angles of this life had any right to make him seem. In the last 2 days, he had started calling me Signorina Medico whenever Tommaso wasn't listening. "Boss going to hate this mess," he whispered. "Then live and annoy him yourself." He coughed blood. Dante knelt on Luciano's other side and took the man's shoulder as if anchoring him could change the physics of loss. His face gave nothing away. Only his hand tightened once. "There was a note," Luciano said. Tommaso passed it over with blood on the envelope. "For Elena Morti." My vision narrowed. Dante opened it, read one line, then folded it shut before I could see. "Tell me." "No, Dante." Luciano's gaze found mine instead. He was struggling now, the edges of him already receding. "Said," he breathed, "pretty birds fall first." Then he was gone. The kitchen stayed very still. Teresa crossed herself with flour on her fingers. Bruno looked at the floor like he had never seen one before. Tommaso turned away and punched the cold room door hard enough to split his knuckles. I sat back with Luciano's blood soaking my sleeves and understood in one brutal second what it cost to stand near Dante long enough for the world to notice. Later that morning, Dante put passports on the library desk. Mine, Matteo S., 2 ferry tickets to Naples under different names, cash, a set of keys to a flat in Rome I had never seen. "You're sending me away." He stood on the other side of the desk, sunlight striping the carpet between us. "Yes, because of a note. Because of a body in my kitchen." Something hot and reckless surged up in me. "You don't get to kiss me in a cellar and then file me as logistics." His jaw tightened. "This is not logistics. It feels like it. For me," he said and stopped. The unfinished words rang louder than a confession would have. He slid the tickets closer. "The boat leaves at 6. Tommaso will take you." I looked at the passports, at the neat false name under my photograph, at the future being offered to me like mercy. "And if I don't go, then I will put you in the car myself. Would you?" He did not answer. That was answer enough. The harbor smelled of diesel, fish, and wet rope. Gulls screamed over rusted cranes. People moved in ordinary clothes carrying ordinary bags toward ordinary ferries, and the sheer audacity of normal life almost made me dizzy. Matteo met us near Gate C with a cut on his eyebrow and panic written all through him. "Elena!" He grabbed me hard enough to hurt. I let him because he was my brother and I had not seen him in days, and Luciano was dead, and my body no longer knew what to do with grief. Tommaso stayed a few feet away, one hand inside his jacket. Matteo looked past me toward the black car where Dante had not come. His mouth hardened. Good, he finally made one decent decision. I turned toward the boarding ramp. That was the real exit point. My clean line, my last ordinary door. Then Matteo said too quickly, "We leave now before Salvo's men sweep the West Road." I stopped. "How do you know they're sweeping the West Road?" His face changed, just enough. Dramatic irony, except this time I was the last one to arrive at it. Matteo knew more, maybe had always known more. "Who told you that?" I asked. "Elena, who?" He looked away first. Everything inside me went cold. My father's numbers, Salvo's name, Matteo disappearing at exactly the wrong times. The fairy horn bellowed. Tommaso took one step closer. "You used me too," I said. "No, I was trying to get us out. By telling him where we'd run." "I told him one route," Matteo snapped, breaking. "One, I thought he'd give me enough money to get you north. I didn't know about the attack." The boarding line moved around us. A woman with a child brushed my shoulder. Somewhere behind me, a bell rang. Leaving was still possible. That was what made the choice real. I could walk up the ramp. I could let Dante fight the war I now understood had already reached far beyond his name and mine. I could keep the part of myself that still remembered flour on my father's hands without blood on it. Instead, I looked at my brother and saw the last of the life I had been planning for myself. Then I handed the passport back to Tommaso. "Take me home," I said. Matteo caught my wrist. "Elena, don't." I pulled free. "It cost more than skin." "No," I said, and felt the old version of me tear cleanly in two. I'm done being carried by men who lie to me and call it love. When I got back into Dante's car, I did it with open eyes. I walked back in. Dante met me in the library when I returned from the harbor. He did not ask why I had come back. Perhaps he saw it on my face. Perhaps Tommaso told him before I crossed the threshold. Perhaps men like him learned long ago not to insult irreversible choices by forcing them into language too soon. He looked at the unused passport in my hand, then at me. "You had the chance." "Yes, and my brother knew the roadblock positions before we got there." Something went hard in his eyes. "Matteo, I think he sold one route to Salvo and lied to himself about the rest." Dante stepped closer. "You could still go," I laughed once. There was nothing soft left in the sound. "No." "I couldn't." He reached out as if he meant to touch my cheek, then stopped 2 inches away. Restrain again, even now, especially now. Before either of us could ruin the moment by saying too much, Bruno burst into the doorway with 3 phones, a half-eaten apple, and the expression of a man being personally persecuted by logistics. "Minor update," he said. "The phones are screaming. Teresa has threatened to poison 2 of the guards for tracking mud through her hall. And if we are all going to make war decisions before lunch, I insist someone let me eat a proper sandwich first." Tommaso appeared behind him. Matteo's phone pinged near the old Morty cannery outside Marsala. I went cold. The cannery had belonged to my mother's brothers before the family lost it. Empty for years, salt-eaten walls. Broken windows, a place childhood had turned into myth because no one bothered to demolish it. Dante was already moving. "No," he said to me. "Yes, Elena, he'll talk to me. He just sold a route that got Luciano killed." I flinched. He saw it, regretted nothing. "That's exactly why I'm coming," I said. "If Salvo wants what's left in my head, Matteo will be there." His silence lasted 2 beats too long. That was how I knew he had already decided against me. I made my mistake 10 minutes later. Tommaso stopped in the armory hall to answer a call. Bruno went to the garage. Dante disappeared into his office with 2 captains. And I, who had spent 3 days being guarded like a fragile state secret, saw the service corridor unoccupied and thought I could shave 5 minutes off a war. I took Teresa's delivery car. I got almost to the coastal road before a van boxed me in from both sides. They didn't need to hit me. They knew I would stop once the shotgun appeared through the passenger window. The man who opened my door wore a familiar suit and a face I knew from the Villa Guard roster. Rico Ferretti, Tommaso's second. "Sorry, signorina," he said, and the apology was real enough to make it worse. "Orders!" The betrayal landed cleanly because it had never occurred to me to expect him. Not Rico with his dull jokes and his habit of leaving the kitchen biscuits untouched for Teresa's sake. Close, trusted, invisible until the knife turned. They took my phone, zip-tied my wrists, and drove me to the cannery. The building looked exactly as childhood memory and ruin would design it. Concrete sweating salt, old conveyor tracks rusting under pigeon droppings. The sea pounding somewhere, unseen behind cracked loading doors. They put me in an upstairs packing room with a single chair, a single bulb, and Matteo already there with blood on his lip. My heart did a stupid thing and lurched toward him anyway. "Elena, what did you do?" He looked wrecked. Guilty. Young in a way men only become when their bad decisions finally outrun their excuses. "I didn't mean this. No one ever means the part where someone dies." The door opened behind us. Salvo entered leaning on his cane he did not need, immaculate suit, mild smile. The kind of elegant monster who preferred polished shoes at the scene of other people's pain. Rico stayed at the door with his gun lowered, shame thick on him. "Children," Salvo said. Always choosing urgency over patience. Matteo stood up so fast the chair skidded. "You said she'd be safe." "I said she'd be alive." Dante's mirror there, an older version stripped of every limit. What Dante might have become if grief had finished hollowing him out instead of merely sharpening him. Salvo loved control the way Dante used it, efficiently. But where Dante spent himself to protect, Salvo spent everyone else. He looked at me with almost affectionate disappointment. "Your father complicated everything when he tried to confess." My mouth dried out. "You killed him. I had him stopped. That's not different." "No," Salvo agreed. "It rarely is." The slow mystery opened wider. "What about Sophia?" I asked, because the name had been haunting every room Dante entered. Salvo's smile thinned. "A tragedy, but useful." After the docks fire, Dante became dependable. Matteo made a noise like he might be sick. I stared at Salvo and understood that some men call murder instruction if it produces obedience. He came nearer. "Your father hid the last root key well. In you, tell me what page 47 means." I looked at Matteo instead. "Did you know?" He was crying now, furious with himself for it. "Not about the girl, not about the fire, I swear." I believed that. I hated it. Salvo nodded to Rico. Rico crossed the room and cut one of my zip ties just enough for me to flex my fingers. A test. Kindness as strategy. He set a notebook and pencil on the crate in front of me. "Right," Salvo said. I picked up the pencil and did the only useful thing panic left me. I wrote a recipe. Not the code he wanted. A real one. Ciambellane with fennel seed, Teresa's version, not mine. But I changed 3 ingredient amounts and the oven temperature to the grid coordinates of the broken sea door on the west side. The one no one used because the hinges were corroded. Bruno knew Teresa's recipes. Bruno would notice the wrong fennel, if the page reached him, if anyone got close enough to matter. Salvo took the sheet and glanced over it. "You're stalling." "Yes," I said. He smiled, almost proud. "Good, your father never learned to do it gracefully." Outside, somewhere deep in the building, an engine cut. Boots struck concrete. Too soon or too late, I couldn't tell which. Rico's face changed first. That was how I knew Dante had come. The first shot sounded from below the packing floor, not wild, not panicked. One shot. Then another. Then the deep metal slam of a loading door forced inward. Salvo did not curse. That was the terrible thing about him. He accepted catastrophe the way another man accepted weather, as something to be exploited rather than denied. "Move her," he said. Rico grabbed my arm. Matteo moved at the same time, maybe to help, maybe to stop, maybe finally unable to stand still inside what he had done. Salvo's cane came up and cracked across Matteo's knee with surgical precision. My brother went down with a cry. I drove my elbow back into Rico's ribs. He lost his grip long enough for me to wrench free and run toward the west wall. The old sea door was half-rotted but still bolted. I hit the release wheel with both hands. Salt flaked under my palms. It stuck. Below us, men shouted in Sicilian. "Bruno, left," Tommaso's voice. Then Bruno, breathless and offended even in battle. "If I die in a fish factory, I'll haunt all of you." Absurd relief punched straight through my fear. I threw my weight against the wheel again. It moved a fraction. Rico reached me, grabbed my shoulder, and turned me hard enough to bruise. "I said sorry," he snapped, and for the first time anger broke through his guilt. Then mean it. I stamped his foot, drove the loose end of the broken zip tie into his face, and hit the release wheel one last time. The sea door bucked open with a scream of metal and a rush of cold air off the water. Rico lunged. He never got to me. Dante came through the doorway behind him like the consequence of a bad decision. He did not shout, did not posture. He took Rico's gun hand, broke the wrist, and put him on the concrete in less time than it took me to inhale. Tommaso entered on Dante's right. Bruno behind them both, vest askew and hair full of dust. For one suspended second the room held. Salvo had already gone. Of course he had. "Matteo," I said, pointing. Tommaso moved to secure him, but my brother was not fighting anymore. He was curled around his ruined knee, white-faced and shaking. Rico moaned where he lay. Bruno kicked the fallen gun away and glared down at him. "You traitorous son of a mediocre tailor," he said. "I trusted you with parking protocols." I made a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. Bruno looked up, saw me standing, and his entire expression changed. "You're bleeding. Not mine. Excellent, I'm reaching emotional capacity." Then Dante was in front of me. He touched my face, my shoulders, my arms, searching without looking frantic and somehow terrifying me more because I knew how much effort that calm cost him. His hand found the bruise forming on my shoulder and stayed there. "Talk. I'm fine. Again, I'm fine." He closed his eyes for one beat, forehead nearly touching mine. That was not almost anymore. That was collision without spectacle. "I left," I whispered. "I made it worse. I thought I could get there before." "Stop. No, you don't get to tell me to stop when Luciano is dead," and his hand slid to the back of my neck. Gentle, absolute. "You are alive." I started crying then, not elegantly, not in a way that made me look young or tragic or worth poetry. Just like a person whose fear had been held too long by muscle and finally found a seam. Dante gathered me in without comment. My face hit the front of his jacket. Gunpowder, clean linen. The colder scent beneath. One of his hands spread over my back. The other stayed at my neck like he could keep my pulse in place by force if necessary. Behind us, Bruno said softly to Tommaso, "Look away." "I enjoy living." Tommaso, bleeding through his sleeve, answered, "For once we agree." When I could breathe again, I pulled back enough to look at Matteo. "Did you know he killed Papa?" My brother shook his head, crying openly now. "No. Did you know about Sofia?" "No. Why?" He swallowed blood and shame together. "Because I was tired of being broke." Because he made it sound temporary. Because I thought clever men always survive the bargains they understand halfway. Dante looked at him the way judges must look at condemned men they did not bother to hate. "He'll live," he said to Tommaso. "For now." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, not police, salvator spotters on the road. Time was thinning. Bruno held up the coded recipe page I had written. For the record, this was brilliant, also cruel. Teresa's phenyl ratios are sacred. A laugh escaped me on a tear. He softened. "You remembered I'd notice." "Yes," he puffed up despite the circumstances. "Naturally." Tommaso stepped closer, eyes on the stairwell. "Salvo's headed for Palermo. Docks if he wants old records, Vineyard if he wants leverage. We won't get both." "I know where he'll go," I said. 3 men turned to me. "Page 47, I said. He asked because it's the final route key. But it isn't a route. It's a storage ledger hidden under the old dock chapel in Palermo, the same chapel district where Sofia died. Dante went very still. Slow mystery, final shape. Salvo had not only killed to keep control. He had kept the evidence near the site of the first wound, close enough to visit like a private joke. "Then he wants the records before sunrise," Tommaso said. "He wants to watch me come for them," Dante answered. No one argued. We moved fast after that. Matteo was bound and taken with us. Rico stayed for local men to collect if he survived the pain in his broken wrist and broken loyalties. On the drive back toward Palermo, I sat beside Dante again with my hand in his, both of us pretending the contact had happened by accident. It hadn't. He looked out the window at the dark water and said, so quietly I nearly missed it, "If it goes wrong, you leave when Tommaso tells you." "No." His thumb tightened once over my knuckles. Sparrow, the word was warmer now, not possession, pleading disguised as command. I looked at the horizon, where dawn would eventually begin, and understood that one of us might not survive the hour when it did. We drove toward it anyway. Palermo before dawn looked like a city trying not to remember itself. Wet stone, closed shutters, fishermen moving early through alleys older than reason. The old dock chapel stood where Dante said it would, small and crooked between two abandoned storehouses near the Black Water. A forgotten building the city had built around, and then politely ignored. The bell tower had cracked years ago. Salt had eaten half the saints off the facade. The sea breathed against the pilings below like an animal too large for the dark. Salvo had chosen the place carefully. Of course he had. Dante placed men at both warehouse doors, one on the quay, two along the alley wall. Bruno checked the van, checked Matteo's restraints, checked his own vest, then muttered that near-death operations would be more tolerable with proper breakfast. Tommaso loaded a fresh magazine one-handed because the other arm was strapped tight from the cannery. "You should sit this out," I told him. He glanced at me. "And miss the chance to be right all evening if we live. Impossible." That was Tommaso's version of affection. It landed harder because it was rare. Dante stood a little apart from the others with the lighter in his hand. Click, shut, click, not nerves, measure, timing. The sound opened chapter 1 like a locked gate. Here it sounded like a clock counting down to blood. "He'll have exits," I said. "Yes. He'll want to talk first." "Yes. I hate how well you know him." Dante looked at the ruined chapel. "So do I." We entered through the sacristy door. Inside, the air smelled of damp plaster, old incense, and diesel drifting in from the docks. Moonlight knifed through broken, stained glass. The altar had been stripped years ago, leaving only a stone platform and a wall niche where a saint's feet remained without the body above them. Near the front pews, a section of floor had been lifted. Ledger crates, metal boxes, proof, and Salvo waiting exactly where the aisle widened. He wore dark wool despite the heat, cane in one hand, pistol in the other. Two men flanked him. A third held a knife to Matteo's throat near the side aisle. My brother looked gray with fear and pain. "You brought her," Salvo said, eyes on Dante. "Predictable." "You brought him," Dante answered, glancing once at Matteo. "Cruelty is not strategy, uncle, it's habit." Salvo smiled with real pleasure. "And yet habit built everything you inherited." Villain mirror. There it was in full, the same belief in order, the same refusal to dramatize power. Only Salvo had allowed grief and greed to calcify into philosophy. He believed love was a defect to be cauterized early. He had made Dante by destroying what Dante loved first and calling the result strength. "You killed Sophia," Dante said. "Not a question. At last not a mystery." Salvo sighed. "I removed leverage your father was too sentimental to guard. Then he died week 2. The room changed. Dante did not rush him. That would have been easier to survive. Instead, he stepped forward once, gaze level, gun steady, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw not control but its final cost. Whatever piece of him had once believed blood family meant sanctuary died in that aisle before the first shot. Salvo saw it too. "There he is," he said softly. "The man I made." "No," Dante replied. "The man I stopped becoming." Gunfire shattered the chapel. Everything happened at once. Tommaso took the gunman near the left pew. Bruno crashed into the second with enough force to send both of them through a row of chairs. Matteo dropped as the knife flashed. I hit the floor beside the ledger crates. Stone dust burst over my hair. Salvo moved for the side door. I saw the ceiling line before anyone else did, old beams, loosened by damp, a hanging iron votive rack swaying from the shock. One more impact and it would come down across Dante's path. "Right side," I shouted. Dante shifted a fraction before the beam dropped. It smashed into the aisle where he had been, throwing splinters and sparks. Salvo fired from the doorway. Tommaso shoved Dante sideways and took the bullet high in the chest. The sound Dante made then was the ugliest thing I had ever heard from a human throat. He caught Tommaso as he fell. Bruno swore and returned fire so hard the doorway exploded into stone chips. Matteo crawled toward cover, sobbing my name. The sea hammered the pilings below. Somewhere outside, more men were running in. I got to Tommaso's side with my hands already pressing down. "Stay with me," I said. Tommaso looked at the blood spreading under my fingers and somehow managed disdain. "You really do appear only for my worst days." "Shut up. That's not bedside manner." His mouth twitched, then the line of it softened. He looked past me to Dante. "Boss," he said. Dante knelt. Tommaso's hand caught his sleeve. "Let the girl keep arguing with you," Tommaso whispered. "The house sounds less dead." Then he was gone, no speech, no prolonged nobility. Just absence where a man had been. Dante stood. He did not say Tommaso's name again. He simply turned and followed Salvo through the side door into the alley with a calmness so complete it frightened me more than grief. I went after him. Outside, the alley ran between the chapel and the sea wall, slick with moss and old salt. Salvo had made it 10 yards. Bruno's shot had clipped his leg. He leaned on the cane for real now. Dante stopped 3 paces away. "You should let the police have me," Salvo said, almost conversational. "Clean hands become you." "I never had clean hands. That's my point." Salvo raised the gun. I moved before he fired, hurling one of the ledger boxes into his bad leg. The shot went wild into the key wall. Dante fired once. Salvo staggered back against the sea barrier and looked almost amused at the blood rising through his coat. "You chose badly," he said to me. "Maybe," I answered. He looked at Dante then, at last with something like truth. "You still became mine." Dante's face did not change. "No," he said. "I buried you." Salvo died against the wall with the sea at his back and the chapel bells silent above him. There was no triumph in it, only aftermath. When the last shots ended, and the ledgers were in Bruno's hands and Matteo was in custody, and dawn finally bled pale over the harbor. I stood in the alley with Tommaso's blood dried on my sleeves, and Dante's hand, locked around mine like he was relearning the shape of survival from the outside in. It was over. War does not end cleanly just because the shooting stops. There were statements to give through lawyers, shipments to reroute, captains to test for loyalty, and funerals conducted with the sober choreography of men who had buried too many brothers to waste words on surprise. Salvo's ledgers burned 3 politicians, 2 customs officers, and 1 bishop who claimed not to know why his offshore accounts smelled like diesel. Matteo disappeared into a deal Dante arranged with a magistrate. Not freedom, not prison exactly, but a narrow corridor between them where he would spend years paying for the kind of cowardice that leaves other people dead. I did not see him again before he left Sicily. Tommaso was buried on a hill above the sea under cypress trees and a sky so painfully blue it felt insulting. Bruno wore a black suit that fit like a threat and cried exactly once, furious about it afterward. Teresa set rosemary on the grave and said, "He hated sweet coffee and liars," which somehow made me cry harder than the priest. Dante stood through the entire service without moving. When it ended, people approached him one by one. Captains, cousins, men who owed him fealty and men who only owed him fear. He answered each with a nod or a sentence, nothing more. Only when the hill cleared did he come stand beside me. The sea was far below us, brilliant and indifferent. Wind moved the ends of my black dress. He held something in his hand. A ring box, I thought stupidly for one panicked second. Instead he opened his palm. Keys, 1 antique brass key on a plain steel ring, 1 house key. 1 smaller key I recognized from the pastry pantry lock in the villa kitchen. 1 sleek black car Fob Bruno would consider a religious object. I looked up. "What is this?" "The West apartment in Palermo, the pantry at the villa, the bakery space below the apartment if you want it." He spoke as carefully as if every word had to cross a live wire. "And a car Bruno claims you'll scratch." From behind us, Bruno called, "You absolutely will." Teresa smacked his arm without looking. He took this as intimacy. My throat tightened. "Why are you giving me keys?" "Because I'm done locking doors behind you." The breath I drew hurt. This was not a fairy tale proposal. No violin string timing. No polished speech. Just a man built out of restraint offering access where he once offered containment. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" He looked at the sea, then back at me. "Keep you, deserve you. Build anything that isn't made to withstand bullets first." I laughed softly through tears I was tired of, but apparently still capable of producing. "That is a terrible proposal." His brow lowered. "Proposal." I folded his fingers back over the keys, then reopened them with my own hand in his. "If you're going to ask me to stay, Dante Salvator, you should at least know when you're asking." For the first time in weeks, something unguarded touched his face. Small, astonished, human. "Then stay," he said. "Not because you're safer with me, not because leaving is impossible. Stay because you've seen exactly what this costs and you choose it anyway." That was the only proposal that would ever have mattered. "Yes," I whispered. He exhaled as if the answer had been lodged in his ribs for days. Bruno, who had clearly been eavesdropping with the moral discipline of a raccoon, clapped one enormous hand over his own mouth. Teresa rolled her eyes. "If you ruin this, I'll bury you beside Tommaso for symmetry." "I'm moved," Bruno whispered hoarsely. "And also starving." A week later, I moved into the Palermo apartment above the bakery space Dante had quietly bought years ago under another name. The place overlooked a narrow street, where old women argued from balconies and scooters, ignored every law except gravity. The kitchen downstairs had cracked white tile, a working oven, and windows that faced east. Before dawn, the light there turned the counters silver. Some nights Dante slept beside me. Some nights he didn't come until morning, because empire and violence still kept their own clocks. But when he entered, the apartment changed the same way every room changed around him. Only now the silence that followed was not fear alone. It was arrival. On the first night he stayed through sunrise, I found him in the kitchen in shirt sleeves staring at the empty mixers as if they might be armed. "You look suspicious," I said. "They have too many attachments." "That's true, it's how they gain confidence." I came up beside him barefoot on the tile. He smelled like late hours, clean soap, and the cold city air below the sweeter trace of my dough rising in bowls. He glanced at my hands dusted with flour. "What are you making?" "Cornetti. For the house, for breakfast." His eyes shifted to my face. "For us?" The quiet in the question undid me. "Yes," I said. He touched my cheek with the backs of his fingers. "Sparrow," same word, entirely different weight. No cold observation now, no claim sharpened into warning, just warmth roughened by survival. Later, when we ate leaning against the counter while Palermo woke beyond the windows, he set his lighter down beside the butter dish and let it stay there untouched. For once, nothing in the room needed guarding. 9 months later, the bakery opened before sunrise 3 days a week, and after sunrise the other 4. Depending on whether Bruno had managed to bully the delivery drivers into punctuality, or merely into emotional compliance. He called the place La Rondine, the first time he saw the sign go up, and then tried to deny he'd done any such sentimental thing. Teresa informed everyone that he had personally repolished the brass letters twice. Bruno claimed this was slander and demanded proof no one bothered providing. The bakery smelled like butter, espresso, citrus peel, and the warm yeasty breath of dough climbing in bowls near the stove. By 5:30 the first trays were proofed, the second coffee pot was on, and Bruno was standing in the doorway with 2 crates of blood oranges and the look of a man suffering for art. "I want it formally noted," he said, setting the crates down with theatrical despair, "that I have now delivered pastry ingredients before dawn for 9 consecutive months while maintaining a body that deserves public funding." Teresa, counting coins by the till, did not look up. "Your body deserves vegetables. My body is a miracle of denial. It's a miracle of cured meat." He pressed a hand to his chest. "Cruelty from the woman I may one day marry." Elena witnessed this. I smiled into the dough. Teresa's mouth twitched despite herself, which in her language was practically a sonnet. Outside, Palermo was only just beginning to wake. A scooter coughed down the narrow street. A fishmonger shouted somewhere beyond the corner. The sky above the rooftops was still the deep blue that comes before sunrise commits to itself. My favorite hour, the hour I used to think belonged to escape. Now it belonged to beginnings. I was glazing the first batch of orange brioche when the bell over the back door did not ring. It never rang when Dante came in. He had fixed it months ago and then somehow taught the hinges to respect him. Still, I knew he was there before I turned. Not because the room went silent, though it did in its own small way. Because the air changed. Cold morning on wool, dark cologne under cleaner notes. The particular stillness he carried in with him, as if the night had followed him to the threshold and stopped there. Then came the lighter. Click. The sound ran through me so quickly, it almost felt like memory before it felt like the present. The same silver lighter. The same neat, metallic note that had once turned a locked courtyard into the edge of my life. Now it came from the bakery doorway while dawn waited outside the windows and warm sugar breathed against the glass. I looked up. His tie was loose. His coat was unbuttoned. There was a split across the knuckles of his right hand, fresh enough that blood had dried in the lines of his skin, but not fresh enough to still be falling. One of his men must have gotten stupid before sunrise. Some things in his world did not become soft just because ours had learned warmth. I was already moving before I said his name. That was the bookend, the truth of me. Again. I went to the wound first. He saw it happen. I knew he did because his face changed in that tiny, devastating way I had learned to live for. Sit, I said, catching his wrist. Bruno looked up, saw the blood, and put both hands in the air. I refused to be part of this. Teresa, if anyone bleeds on the orange brioche, I'm calling a union. There is no union, Teresa said. There should be. Dante let me pull him onto the stool by the prep table. That more than the blood told me he was tired. I fetched the small tin from the shelf above the coffee grinder, antiseptic, gauze, tape, the ordinary sacrament of our mornings. When I came back, his lighter sat on the counter beside the bowl of egg wash, catching the first thread of pale light. I cleaned his knuckles carefully. The cut wasn't deep, just ugly. What happened? I asked. A conversation ended badly. With whom? A man who forgot which shipment routes are still mine. Alive, he looked at me, I sighed. That answered itself. His hand stayed open in mine. Large, warm, scarred in old places, newly broken in one. I remembered blood on courtyard stone, blood on chapel floors. Blood in a cannery room with the sea battering the walls. I remembered the first time I had touched him in fear, the first time in want, the first time in grief. And all at once, I felt how radical this was, standing barefoot in flower dust. Taping up the hand of a man feared across half an island, while Bruno argued with Teresa about carbohydrates 6 feet away. You did it again, Dante said quietly. I glanced up. Did what? His eyes held mine. Went to the wound before me. The room seemed to narrow around the sentence. Bruno, for once possessing survival instinct, grabbed a tray and backed toward the ovens. Teresa, he whispered loudly, we should give them privacy. Teresa took the tray from him. You should give me 10 euros. You cried first at the funeral. I had dust in my eye. You had emotion in your face. He muttered something scandalized under his breath and disappeared to the back room with her following at a pace that suggested she wanted the last word and fully expected to get it. Then it was only the two of us. The ovens, the dawn, the city breathing beyond the shutters. I finished the bandage and kept his hand a second longer than necessary. You noticed that in the courtyard? Yes, I swallowed. Why did it matter? For a moment I thought he might not answer. Old habits in him still preferred silence to any wound language could deepen. Then he turned his hand over and linked our fingers around the clean white wrap. Because everyone else looked at power first, he said. You looked at pain. My throat tightened. The first time I saw you, he went on, voice low and even and somehow more intimate for how hard he worked to keep it that way, I thought it was recklessness. Then the road. Then Luciano. Then Tommaso. every time the same thing, you move toward what hurts. Even when you should protect yourself instead. I wanted to say something clever, something that would save me from how bare the moment felt. I had grown around him, but not out of this kind of helplessness. That sounds less romantic when you describe it like a character defect. A shadow of a smile touched his mouth. It nearly ruined me, I laughed softly, then stopped when I saw he was not joking. That first morning, he said, I heard the lighter in the courtyard and thought I was waiting to stop an escape. Then you knelt in blood and ignored me. I knew exactly how dangerous that was for me. The words landed low and deep. You could have let me go at the harbor, I said. Yes, but you didn't. No, do you ever wish you had? He looked past me for one brief second, toward the front windows where the sky was finally lightening over the street. When his gaze returned, it was steady enough to stand in. Never you, he said. Only the cost. There it was, the unresolved thing, not doubt about love, never that, the price of it. The people buried along the way. Tommaso on the hill, Luciano in the kitchen, Matteo somewhere on the mainland with remorse for company. Love had been earned here, but it had not arrived clean. I touched the bandage once with my thumb. I think that's the only honest answer. He lifted my flour-dusted hand and pressed his mouth to the inside of my wrist, right over the pulse he used to monitor like a threat. Now the gesture felt like a vow made quieter because it no longer needed spectacle. Sparrow, he murmured, warm now, entirely warm, home inside the word. From the back room came Bruno's voice, indignant and delighted all at once. Teresa Bellomo, if this is pity, I accept it joyfully. I blinked, then laughed. Dante's brow lifted. She kissed him, I guessed. He'll discuss nothing else for a month. Only a month, 3 if we're lucky. The front shutters brightened. I turned back to the counter and Dante rose with me. Together we slid the first tray into the oven. Butter, orange heat. The brioche would rise because we gave it warmth and time. Some truths did not need improving. When I reached for the timer, his lighter clicked once behind me. I looked over my shoulder. He had only opened it to light the small candle Teresa kept beneath the saint on the kitchen shelf, the one for workers, travelers, and the foolish. The flame took. Same sound. Completely different weight. The first morning I heard it, a door closed. This time before dawn, it sounded like home. And maybe that is the part that still lingers with me most. Not whether I loved him, because I did, and not whether he loved me, because by then I knew the shape of that too. It was the cost. The graves behind us, the blood that built the quiet. The fact that choosing a man like Dante meant choosing every shadow that followed him, then learning which ones could live at your table without swallowing the light. So tell me this, would you have chosen Dante and accepted everything it cost to love him?